Welcome back, students. We will just continue with the second parasitic nematode, that is Encyclostoma duodenale. And we have finished about the few common structures and the morphology etc. of the Encyclostoma duodenale. And now let's pass on to the life cycle of Encyclostoma duodenale. This life cycle of Encyclostoma is completed in man, and an intermediate host is being absent. The adult male and the female undergo the mating, and these adult male and the female undergo mating in the human intestine, and the fertilization is internal inside the female member. And the female filled with the fertilized eggs is called as a gravid female, and this female discharges the eggs to the human intestine, and the female discharges about nearly 20,000 eggs, nearly 20,000 eggs per day. And these eggs find their way outside along with the human fecus, and these eggs are colorless, oval or elliptical in shape, as you can see here, and it is enclosed with a transparent membrane. Here you can see the eggs are enclosed inside a transparent shell or the egg capsule, and the eggs released in the fecus are usually in the 2 to 8 cell stage. You can see here different cells are present, and under favorable condition of moisture, temperature and oxygen, they complete their development inside the soil. So here you can see the numerous cells are there inside this capsule, and under favorable condition these egg complete their development inside the soil, and in about 48 days the embryo gets hatches, and the embryo is called as a rhabditiform larvae, and it is a juvenile form, and it leads an active life, feeding and growing for some time, undergoes a 2 successive molt, and in about a week of time it transfers into a second juvenile form called as a filariform larvae. So rhabditiform undergoes into a successive molt and develops into another larval stage called as a filariform larvae. Then it feeds on the organic debris and the soil bacteria. Then it stops feeding and transformed into a juvenile worm known as a non-feeding filariform larvae. This filariform larvae develops into another larval form called as a non-feeding filariform larvae, or it is also called as a strongyliform larvae. It's also called as a strongyliform. STRONGYLIFORM, that is strongyliform larvae. So this rhabditiform larvae gets converted into the filariform larvae, which is a feeding larvae, and this filariform larvae undergoes a molting and gets converted into the non-feeding form called as a strongyliform larvae, or it's also called as a non-feeding filariform larvae. It is very active and infective stage. Okay, then usually it lives in an upper strata. Of the soil, and it can undergo a further development only if this filariform larvae enters into the body of a man. And the infection or the transmission of the strongyliform larvae is typically the penetrative and percutaneous, that is through the skin of the foot. This larvae penetrates the skin of the foot region, and in rare instances it can be contaminated through the food and water. So it happens only rarely. Mainly it is through the skin of the foot. And when the man walks barefooted over the fecally contaminated soil, the larva attaches to its sole, and it pierces the skin and enters his body in large numbers. And on gaining the access, on reaching the human body, either through the penetration or through the contamination, this strongyliform larvae, what happens is that they punctures the blood vessels and enters the circulatory system. It enters the circulatory system and reaches the right auricle in about the 2 days after penetration. And from the right auricle, it passes to the right ventricle. Then what happens is that it enters a pulmonary artery, then comes to the lungs. It reaches to the lungs. So after entering into the circulatory system, it reaches the heart through the right auricle, then it reaches the right ventricle, then from the heart it reaches the lungs. Okay, then now it pierces a capillary wall and leaves a blood stream and comes out to the air cavities of the lung, and from there it descends through the airway and reaches the pharynx. From the trachea it reaches the pharynx, and soon it passes down to the esophagus and stomach and reaches the small intestine. And in the small intestine it undergoes a final molt and transforms into the last juvenile worm, and this is almost similar to that of the adult worm. So from the small intestine it undergoes a maximum development, and it gets converted into a last juvenile form, and where it just develops into the adult. Then it matures, develops the gonads, and it attaches to the intestinal mucosa, and it derives the nutrients from the host, attains a sexual maturity. The male and the females develops, and the fully developed adult worm results, and the same cycle gets repeated. So that is a complete life cycle of Ancylostoma duodenale. So the stage, we can just divide whole this life cycle into different stages. That is clearly noted in this slide. That is stage 1, that is a passage of the eggs from the infested host. So the eggs which reaches the external environment through the fecus which is laid by the infected host. Then the development inside the soil. So inside the soil, that is external development takes place. That is a stage 2 case. Then what happens is that it enters into the new host. It completes its larval life cycle, and then it reaches a filariform, that is a strongyliform larval form, that is a non-feeding filariform larvae, enters into the new host through the skin, through the foot. Then it migrates from the circulatory system and it reaches the digestive system. Okay, and so this happens. And what happens next? Localization and the laying of the eggs takes place. So inside this intestine, inside the small intestine, they get clinged to the intestinal wall, and then they imbibe all the nutrients, they enlarges, and then they develop attains sexual maturity. Then again the male and the female develops, the mating takes place, the life cycle again starts. So that is all about the life cycle of this Ancylostoma duodenale. So once again it is depicted in this diagram. So the mature, an infected man, when accidentally swallows the contaminated fecal contaminated with this Ancylostoma duodenale, or through the bare food, this pinworm enters into, the hookworm enters into the circulatory system. This hookworm enters into the circulatory system. Then through the circulatory system it reaches the lungs. Finally it ends up in the small intestine, where they gets attached to the intestinal wall. Then sexual maturity attains. Then through the fecus the eggs are released. Inside the along with the fecal matter inside the soil, the larvae matures. The rhabditiform larva emerges. The filariform larva, that is infectious stage, reaches. Again it might infect a new host. So this life cycle repeats. So this is again another diagram which is depicted here, which clearly denotes the life cycle of this larval form, or this nematode parasite form. Then about the pathogenicity of this worm, the worms causes a hookworm disease or encyclostomiasis, that is a disease caused by this Encyclostoma duodenale. And the mode of infection is that it occurs when the man walks barefoot on the fecally contaminated soil, and the filariform larvae penetrates directly through the skin, and they come in contact. And the most common sites of the entry usually are through the skin between the toes, then dorsum of the feet or the inner side of the soles. So where the skin are little less thick, through this skin this larval form enters into the circulatory system, and the larvae penetrate any part of the skin which is sufficiently thin, and the infection may occur by the accidental drinking of the contaminated water with filarial worm. That also can takes place. And infecting agent, it is a filariform larvae that migrates through the lungs or it enters through the skin, and finally it reaches the small intestine. And the pathogenic effects caused by the Encyclostoma larva form and the adult worm. So both the larvae and the adult can cause the pathogenic effects in the host body. And what are the pathogenic effects caused by the Encyclostoma larvae? That is a lesion of the skin. That is the first pathogenic effect that is caused by this larval form. That is hookworm larvae dermatitis takes place, mainly the itching. And the penetration of the skin by this filariform larvae may be the asymptotic in previously uninfected individual. So if the first time this worms enters into the body, it may not cause any pathogenic effect, but still it can cause a ground itch, or the Encyclostome dermatitis is also called as a ground itch. And there will be a creeping eruption. If an heavy load of this larvae enters into the body of a host, it can cause a creeping eruption, a creeping like feeling below the skin. Then the ground itch occurs at the site of the entry, and it disappears usually after 1 or 2 weeks. So these are the pictures of the symptoms that is caused due to the infection of this. That is, a edema can cause, that is, an angle of the feet may become swollen. Then this type of creeping appearance can cause. Then ascites is a condition, that is a waterlogged condition. The stomach can appear like this. So these are the certain condition. Then so creeping eruption is a condition in which the filariform larvae wander through the skin for the several weeks and months, producing reddish itchy papillae. So this type of papillae appears. It's called as a ground creeping eruption. Then there is a lesion in the lungs, that is bronchitis, and the bronchopneumonia may occur when the larvae break through the pulmonary capillaries and enters the alveolar space. So that can also occurs. Then pathogenic effects caused by the adult worm is that they inhabit the small intestine, attaching themselves to the mucous membrane and fluid, and causes the anemia in children. Thank you.